Shalom, everyone. Once again, we are gathered together to be studying the scriptures. Last week we were going through the Book of Enoch, but I decided this week we would take a break from the Book of Enoch because, according to the Enoch calendar that I follow, which I believe is the correct calendar, the festival of Purim, the holy day of Purim, was this weekend. It just ended tonight. For I think for you guys it's over now too. It was on from Friday evening all the way to wait, hold on. David, you say something's wrong? What's wrong? Oh, hold on. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Just I don't want to be speaking if the people here can't hear me. But so let's see here. Well, it looks like we've got one viewer. I'm not sure. Wait, hold on. I think I can see who the viewer is if I switch to Google Hangouts in another tab. Sorry for the delay. Okay, we've got several viewers here. Good. We're about to be starting. Just trying to see. David said something's wrong. I'm not sure if he can clarify. But so we are going to be doing this week the Book of Esther. We're going to be studying the Book of Esther, and what many people do not realize is that there's actually another version of the Book of Esther in many manuscripts of the Bible. The version of Esther that most people are familiar with is a version which does not have the mention of oh, I'm breaking up. Okay, so let's see. So let me try to switch the audio. Tell me if my switching of the audio fixes it. Hold on 1 second. Is this better? Am I still breaking up? Hopefully that's fixing it. I'm freezing up also. Laura, are you also having this problem? Okay. I don't know why that is. That's frustrating. Right, so okay, so I'm just going to try to do this, but if for some reason it's really not working, then we will just have to try to see if we can fix it. But right now I'm going to try to go with it. So let me give you guys the resources. I'm going to give you guys the resources that I'm using. Here's one. This is English translation of the Septuagint right there. You should see it in the box. Then here's another translation. New English translation of the Septuagint. Looking at that. Here is Blue Letter Bible, which has the Hebrew text from the Masoretic version. We also have Josephus' account, which agrees with the Septuagint version. So with that said, I'm just opening my Gmail because I want to see. It says we have 2 viewers, and I think when you're in Gmail, you can see who the viewers are. So it'd be good to see who is with us. Can you? Hopefully, you all were able to receive. Okay, what I did made it worse, so I'll put it back to what I had it before. Does that fix it or no? Okay. So let's get started. I'm gonna share my screen now. Just so you guys know, the version of Esther in most people's Bibles from the Hebrew version has no mention of God in it at all, has no Torah, no commandments, no religion at all. It's very godless, very sparse of any moral content. It's a very secular account. In the Greek manuscripts and many other manuscripts, it has a Torah version, a Torah really praising the Torah. This is in pretty much the Bibles of all Christians except the Protestants. It has a hugely praising of the Torah, and this is shocking. It's in the Christian Bibles, and yet it has so much praise and glorification of the Torah. And so this is just an amazing testimony to the differences in the various versions, because not only for the Book of Esther, but we have it for other Bible books as well. There are some radical differences in some of the manuscripts we find, and most of the time the Septuagint version, shockingly, the Greek version is more pro-Torah than the Masoretic Hebrew version that we're all familiar with. So it's a little bit ironic, but that's what we find. So with that said, let me share my screen now. Let's see here. Share screen right here. Okay, so my screen should be shared now. And so now I'm gonna play for you guys a video. And this is the a neat little video I posted the other day of the version of it's like a little trailer for the Book of Esther. So I'm gonna play that little video now, and it just kind of gives you a brief introduction to this very cool concept that we're going to be diving into. Sorry, I had so many tabs open, I think. Yeah, so that's the video I wanted to share with you guys. Sorry about the slowness in that. That's just because I had so many tabs open. So now let's start. I'm going to be reading from the Brenton's translation. So let me do that right now. If you guys want, you can follow along with the King James version of the Bible. I gave the link there, or any English translation that you like as well, you can use of the Hebrew text if you want to follow along, or you can follow along with the Septuagint version. It's this website right here, ecmarsh.com. So I'm going to start reading. The first few verses, all this right here, is not in the Hebrew version. You can also see, I did a special version of the text myself. I went through and I underlined things that are not in the versions that we know. So I've done a lot of study on this, but so yeah. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes, the great king, on the 1st of Nisan, Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Jew dwelling in the city Susa, a great man, serving in the king's palace, saw a vision. Now he was of the captivity which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried captive from Jerusalem, with Jeconiah, the king of Judea. And this was his dream. Behold, voices and a noise, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth. And behold, two great serpents came forth, both ready for conflict. And there came from them a great voice, and by their voice every nation was prepared for battle, even to fight against the nation of the just. And behold, a day of darkness and blackness, tribulation and anguish, affection and tumult upon the earth. And all the righteous nation was troubled, fearing their own afflictions, and they prepared to die, and cried to God. And from their cry there came as it were a great river from a little fountain, even much water, and light and the sun arose, and the lowly were exalted and devoured the honorable. And Mordecai, who had seen this vision and what God desired to do, having awoke, kept it in his heart, and desired by all means to interpret it, even till night. And Mordecai rested quiet in the palace with Gabbatha and Thara, the king's two chamberlains, eunuchs who guarded the palace. And he heard their reasoning and searched out their plans, and learnt that they were preparing to lay hands on King Artaxerxes. And he informed the king concerning them. And the king examined the two chamberlains, and they confessed and were executed. And the king wrote these things for a memorial. Also Mordecai wrote concerning these matters. And the king commanded Mordecai to attend in the palace, and gave gifts for this service. And Aman, the son of Amadoth the Bulgian, was honorable in the sight of the king, and he endeavored to hurt Mordecai and his people because of the two chamberlains of the king. So all that is what scholars call addition A. There's something called the additions to Esther. That's included as part of the Apocrypha. you'll find this in many translations of the Apocrypha. It's called the additions to Esther, but they only do the 6 main additions, and they ignore all the small additions all throughout this text. So there's 6 main additions, additions A through E, they call them, and this is the first one. It's found in many manuscripts of the Bible, edition A, and it's the dream of Mordecai. However, there's this part right here. Hold on. Okay, I'm making sure you guys can see the screen. So there's this second part right here where it seems like it's going out of order, the chronology. It seems it's skipping ahead of the story, and then it backtracks. So some scholars say that this is a proof or indication that this is an addition. I don't think that's the case. I think there are things in the Bible, other books of the Bible, which have things just like this. Chronology is out of order. In the book of 1 Kings, for example, there's 2 chapters in 1 Kings of chapters 21 and 20, I think it is. In the Septuagint version, they're switched. And likewise, all throughout 1 Kings, the chapters are different in the Septuagint version. You've got the same thing for many other books of the Bible, like the book of Jeremiah, the book of Daniel, book of Proverbs. So there's a lot of even the book of Exodus. You find in the book of Exodus some manuscripts have things in different order, and so the chronology issue should not be a basis for rejecting the authenticity of this. And there's also a different version. There were 2 main versions of the Septuagint that were preserved, and in this one, it's called the New English Translation of the Septuagint. It prints it on both sides, Old Greek and Alpha. So basically, what the Alpha version says, it says right here. So after thinking about it, Mordecai. Wait, hold on. It goes right here. Then when Mordecai arose from his sleep, he pondered what the dream meant and what the Mighty One was preparing to do. And his dream was hidden in his heart, and at every opportunity he was trying to figure it out. Its interpretation would become clear to him on the day on which Mordecai napped in the courtyard of the king with Astaios and Thuditus, the 2 eunuchs of the king. So notice, in this version, it says when Mordecai who had seen this dream and what God had determined to do awoke, he had it on his heart and saw until nightfall. Talks about the night. It's not in this one. To understand it in every detail, and then the rest of this, it goes on as if it's just like a regular narrative. But here we see this is like a parenthetical. So that supports the authenticity of this addition section, where it's a parenthetical because it says its interpretation would become clear to him on the day on which, and this stuff. So also something very interesting to show you guys. I looked and compared the differences of the names. In the Septuagint version, the names are very different for some reason. And here is what you can see right here. So you can see this. The Masoretic text spells the name later on in chapter 3 or something of Esther. I can't remember what the exact chapter, but it says Bakuten. That's the Masoretic. Josephus says like something like Baguta or something like that. The Septuagint version says Gabuta, so the Gimel and the Bet are switched. Then we've got this Lucianic Alpha reading. It says like it's like an ion or something. And look, you can see that the Bet and the Gimel, or the Gimel and the Bet, kind of look like an ion. So perhaps it was a mistranslation. And the Zion looks kind of like a Wa. So you can see readily how the scribes may have erred on that. The second name that we see is, the second name that we see is Teresh. In the Septuagint one, we see Terra, and then in the Alpha text, we see like Thidot or something like that. And Josephus says something very similar, but instead of a Y, it seems like he also has like a Zion in his reading. So we see a lot of differences in the manuscripts by the scribes. Not only we see the same thing in the Bible. Let me show you a clear example. You're going to find in the book of Ruth. I'll show you. This is a little bit. This is an aside, but it just kind of reinforces the point of how there are errors and falsehoods in the Bible, or they're scribal errors. See right here. This is a genealogy of David. And now, if you guys have a Hebrew Bible yourself, you can look at this up sometime yourselves, and you'll see that this is exactly what is the case. So look right here, these people's names. You've got, these are the generations of David it's talking about. So there's Perez, Hezron begot Ram, Aminadab begot Nahshon. Now here, look at this. Salmon. Let's look at the Hebrew there. Salmon. We've got here, look, it's spelled with a hey, not a noon. Salma. So it should be Salma in Ruth 4:20. But now look at this, Ruth 4:21. It's the same person, Salmon or Salma. But now we've got right here, they're spelling it as Solomon. And you're going to find this in your Hebrew text. You should, if you have a Hebrew text of the Bible, you'll see it says this. These are the two verses right next to each other, and it's contradicting themselves. The spelling is in error, but the scribes corruptly transferred this. So you can see how easily the differences happen. This is very similar to King Solomon. What is with King Solomon? In the Hebrew text for Solomon, it's spelled Salomah, but in the Greek, it's Solomon for some reason. So we see that discrepancy there. So I only showed that, even though that's a tangent, it just kind of reinforces the idea of why there are so many differences in the names. The Septuagint seems to not be as accurate with the names. I don't know why that is. We'll be seeing some of that in a little bit. Yeah, David, I shared all these links earlier. If you need me to share them again, I can share them again. But so now I'm going to start reading, continuing from the Septuagint version. And this is where the Masoretic text starts. Okay, so I'm going to read chapter 1, and then I'll point out the differences. So, and it came to pass after these things in the days of Artaxerxes. This Artaxerxes ruled over 127 provinces from India. In those days, when King Artaxerxes was on the throne in the city of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast to his friends and the other nations, and to the nobles of the Persians and Medes, and the chief of the satraps. And after this, after he had shown to them the wealth of his kingdom and the abundant glory of his wealth during 180 days, when the days of the marriage feast were completed, the king made a banquet to the nations who were present in the city 6 days, in the court of the king's house, adorned with hangings of fine linen, and flax on cords of fine linen and purple, fastened to golden and silver studs on pillars of Parian marble and stone, golden and silver couches on a pavement of emerald stone and of pearl, and of Parian stone, and open worked coverings variously flowered, roses worked round about, gold and silver cups, and a small cup of carbuncle set out of the value of 30,000 talents, abundant and sweet wine which the king himself drank. And this banquet was not according to the appointed law, but so the king would have it. And he charged the stewards to perform his will and that of the company. Also Astine, the queen, made a banquet for the woman in the palace where King Artaxerxes was. Now on the 7th day the king, being merry, told Haman and Bezan and Zara and Barazai and Zathaltha and Abataza and Tharaba, the 7 chamberlains, servants of King Artaxerxes, to bring in the queen to him, to enthrone her and crown her with the diadem, and to show her to the princes and her beauty to the nations, for she was beautiful. But Queen Astine hearkened not to him to come with the chamberlains, so the king was grieved and angered. And he said to his friends, Thus has Asteen spoken. Pronounce therefore upon this law and judgment. So Archisaeus and Sarsatheus and Malasiar, the princes of the Persians and Medes, who were near the king, who sat chief by the king, drew near to him and reported to him, according to the laws, how it was proper to do to Queen Asteen, because she had not done the things commanded of the king by the chamberlains. And Mucaeus said to the king and to the princes, Queen Asteen has not wronged the king only, but also all the king's rulers and princes, for he has told them the words of the queen, and how she disobeyed the king. As then she refused the king Artaxerxes, so this day shall the other ladies of the chiefs of the Persians and Medes, having heard what she said to the king, dare in the same way to dishonor their husbands. If then it seem good to the king, let him make a royal decree, and let it be written according to the laws of the Medes and Persians, and let him not alter, and let not the queen come in to him any more, and and let the king give her royalty to a woman better than she, and let the law of the king which he shall have made be widely proclaimed in his kingdom. And so shall all the women give honor to their husbands, from the poor even to the rich. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Mucaeus had said, and sent into all his kingdom through the several provinces according to their language, in order that the men might be feared in their own houses. So that was chapter 1. That is in the Hebrew text. Now let me share the links again. Here are all the links right here. Okay, so now I'm gonna share with you guys. Let's look at some of these differences here of the chapter. I remember I told you guys I underlined the differences that I could find. What I did for this version that I made, I took the King James version, which is a translation of the Hebrew text, as my base text, and then I compared the Septuagint, listening to it, or maybe I didn't listen to it. I compared it, I think, and then I marked the differences. I added in the differences from the Septuagint. So, for example, in verse 18 of the Septuagint, which is verse 1 of the Hebrew text, we've got this. Now it came to pass after this, in the days, you see, that's an addition right there. In the regular Hebrew text, we don't have after this, because this is the beginning. There's nothing earlier in the Hebrew version, so why would it say after this? That would confuse people. So either the original version had this extra stuff, and after this is correct, or later scribes added that beginning section. I don't believe that's the case, but if they did, then they had to add after this, so that's why there's that difference there. On the other hand, if the scribes removed this beginning section, they were obligated to remove this clause after this right here. Another difference to note is the names. As I said, the names are very unreliable in the Septuagint version for some reason. There's a lot of differences. It's kind of like what you've got with the name of the Messiah. In the Hebrew text, it goes to Jesus, and then all the way down to Jesus. Well, Jesus is very different from the original name of Yeshua or something along those lines. So you see, over time, the Greek names can alter and corrupt, especially. In the Hebrew text, we've got, for this, Ahasuerus. In the Greek version, it seems like it's Artaxerxes, so it would be like an A-R-T Surus, or something like that. So there's a clear difference in chronology here. Did the Book of Esther happen in the time of Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, or did it happen in the time of Artaxerxes? I'm not quite sure on which is the correct reading, but it's just to point out to you guys, there's that difference. Now, let's see some other differences. There are some other minor differences here, too, which there should be no reason why the Septuagint writer to add this randomly. Now, let me see here. 22, verse 22. So that's 1, 2, 3, 5, verse 5. So let's check verse 5 now. verse 5 says, the king made a feast unto all the people. The Septuagint version says, wait, when all these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people. Then it says, when these days, okay, yeah, so it adds, of the marriage feast were expired. So that's an extra detail there. Then we're going to note something interesting too, is 6 days. See here, 6 days? Now, what does this say? We see here, it says 7 days in the Hebrew text. 7 days. But the Septuagint says 6 days. What's very interesting is that in Genesis chapter 1, it says in the Hebrew version of the Masoretic text, it says God finished his work on the 7th day. In the Septuagint and the Samaritan version, it says God finished his work on the 6th day and rested on the 7th. So there are other examples in the Bible of 6 and 7 being altered for some reason. I don't know why that is, but some manuscripts sometimes have 6 and sometimes they have 7. It's a strange difference. Now, look right here. We have an extra mention here of fastened to gold and to silver. Let's check what the Hebrew text here says. Fastened with cords of fine linen and purple 2 silver rings. Right here, we clearly have purple fastened to gold and 2 silver rings. So there's extra details right there. And then also at the very end of this, we've got upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. Right here, we've got an open worked coverings variously flowered, having roses worked round about. Let me see where that was. That was right here. So it seems like there's a lot of extra details here already of the Septuagint version. Now look at the next verse. And they gave drink in vessels of gold and silver and a small cup of carbuncle set out of the value of 30,000 talents and royal wine in sweet abundance, which the king himself drank. We've got the Hebrew text. What does that say? And they gave drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. So what in the world do we got here? We've got the extra detail of and silver and a small cup of carbuncle set out to the value of 30,000 talents. That seems like a original detail. Why would a scribe add something like that? I can readily see why a scribe would remove that, because who cares how much value it is? It doesn't really matter to the story. So it's easily explainable why a scribe would remove that detail. We see all throughout the scriptures of the different versions, a lot of times it seems pretty much the scribes removed things because they thought it was unnecessary detail that we didn't really need to get across the main point of the scripture. All throughout scripture, there's a lot of redundant details in some of manuscripts which are not in other manuscripts. So that's kind of how I explain a lot of these differences. Now let's see here. I'm going to look at this one. The king, when he's talking to his wise men, and in the Hebrew text, she's known as Vashti. As I said, the Septuagint version does the names differently sometimes. It says like Vashtin or something. So, let's see. The king said to the wise men, right here, verse 13. The king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. That doesn't make sense. It says, then the king said to the wise men, but it doesn't say what he said. But in the Septuagint version, well, it's possible that what he said is way down here in verse 15. But according to the Septuagint, it says right here, thus hast Vashti, or as the Septuagint says, thus hast Ashtin spoken, pronounce therefore upon this law and judgment. Also, something interesting to note, the Septuagint says, he said to his friends. The Hebrew version says, he said to the wise men. Wise men. Wise men versus friends. That's a very interesting difference of meaning. So now let's see here. As I said, the names are different in the two versions. And now look at this. The Septuagint version. The Septuagint version here in it says, you see here, what shall we do unto the queen? I don't see it in this one. Maybe it's in the, all right, let's see. It's this one. Hold on 1 second. Okay, then he said to his friends, this is how Ashtin spoke, I'll give you a ruling. I don't know where I got this reading right here. I might have added that. I don't remember. So we'll ignore that one for now. I'm not sure about that one. So pretty much the rest of this is essentially it's identical. Okay. So now we're going to go to the next chapter. I'm going to read the next chapter now. Chapter 2. And after this, the king's anger was pacified, and he no more mentioned Ashtin, bearing in mind what she had said, and how he had condemned her. Then the servants of the king said, let there be sought for the king chaste, beautiful young virgins, and let the king appoint local governors in all the provinces of his kingdom, and let them select fair, chaste young damsels to the city Susa into the woman's apartment, and let them be consigned to the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the woman, and let things for purification and other attendants be given. And let the woman who shall please the king be queen instead of Ashtin. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in the city Susa, and his name was Mordecai, the son of Jairus, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been brought a prisoner from Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried into captivity. And he had a foster child, daughter of Aminadab, his father's brother, and her name was Esther. And when her parents were dead, he brought her up for a wife for himself, and the damsel was beautiful. And because the king's ordinance was published, many damsels were gathered to the city Susa under the hand of Guy. And Esther was brought to Guy, the keeper of the woman. And the damsel pleased him, and she found favor in his sight. And he hastened to give her the things for purification and her portion. And the 7 maidens appointed her out of the palace. And he treated her and her handmaids well in the woman's apartment. But Esther discovered not her family nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. But Mordecai used to walk every day by the woman's court to see what would become of Esther. Now this was the time for a virgin to go into the king, when she would have fulfilled 12 months. For so are the days of purification fulfilled, 6 months while they are anointing themselves with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and women's purifications. And then she goes into the king, and to whomsoever he shall give the command will bring her to come in with him from the woman's apartment to the king's chamber. She enters in the evening, and in the morning she departs to the second woman's apartment, where Guy, the king's chamberlain, is keeper of the woman. And she goes not in to the king again, unless she should be called by name. And when the time was fulfilled for Esther the daughter of Aminadab, the brother of Mordecai's father, to go in to the king, she neglected nothing which the chamberlain, the woman's keeper, commanded. For Esther found grace in the sight of all that looked upon her. So Esther went in to King Artaxerxes in the 12th month, which is Adar, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther, and she found favor beyond all the virgins, and he put on her the queen's crown. And the king made a banquet for all his friends and great men for 7 days, and he highly celebrated the marriage of Esther. And I'm doing my teaching now. Okay. And he highly celebrated the marriage of Esther, and he made a release to those who were under his dominion. But Mordecai served in the palace. Now Esther had not discovered her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear God and perform his commandments, as when she was with him. And Esther changed not her manner of life. And 2 chamberlains of the king, the chiefs of the bodyguard, were grieved because Mordecai was promoted, and they sought to kill King Artaxerxes. And the matter was discovered to Mordecai, and he made it known to Esther. And she declared to the king the matter of the conspiracy. And the king examined the 2 chamberlains and hanged them. And the king gave orders to make a note for memorial in the royal records of the good offices of Mordecai as a commendation. So that's the Septuagint version. As I said, my version, I compared the differences. I try to do. Sometimes I made mistakes accidentally, but for the most part, I did it very well. Here's an interesting difference right away. In verse 1 of chapter 2, the Septuagint version says, he no more mentioned. So he says, he no more mentioned Estine. Chapter 2 of Esther says, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. So the Septuagint version says, he no more mentioned Vashti. It's an interesting difference there. Good to have you with us, Joshua. Okay, so now, continuing. I'm going to mute you for now, okay, Josh? All right. So now let's see some other differences. Okay, here is one of the biggest differences in verse 7. First of all, in verse 7 of the Hebrew text, we've got this. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. What does the Greek version say? It says, and he had a foster child, daughter of Aminadab, his father's brother, and her name was Esther. And he brought her up for him a wife for himself. That's a huge difference of meaning. So basically, we've got the 2 differences. Is her name Hadassah? That's one of the biggest teachings people say. They say Esther's name is Hadassah. Like, Hebrew Roots movement tries to emphasize the original Hebrew name, and they say her original Hebrew name was Hadassah. But according to the Septuagint, that's not true. I looked this up, and I believe I was able to confirm this myself. The Greek translators, they translated Hadassah. They understood that word to mean foster child. And I believe that is correct meaning of that word. And he brought up Hadassah, or in other words, he brought up a foster child, that is Esther, then his uncle's daughter, doesn't give the name here, but the Septuagint gives the name of Aminadab. I think later on the name is given in the Hebrew version, but it's a completely different name. It's Abihail. So there's an interesting difference of names as well. And then it says, for a wife. Many people believe that Esther was married to the king. But this doesn't make sense because of, according to the law, the Jews, the Israelites, were not allowed to marry pagans, the Gentiles. It was a capital crime. That's mentioned in the Book of Jubilees. It's also mentioned in the Book of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they are supposed to divorce their pagan wives. And the same law applied to women marrying a pagan man. They're not allowed to marry pagan men. And yet the Book of Esther appears to say that Esther married a pagan man. But right here we see, wait a minute, Esther was married to Mordecai, it seems. And then it also does not make sense how the king, the way people tell the story is that the king gathered all the maidens, all the virgins from all the nations around him under his authority, and he slept with every single one. That doesn't make sense. I don't think the people of those places would stand that. They would not allow him to violate their daughters, their virgin daughters. Just because they're pagans did not mean that they did not have some moral code or sense of value for their families. And so they wouldn't just have all their daughters sleep with the king. It doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of reasons to conclude, especially in this version of the Book of Esther, that Esther was not married to the king. She was chosen as a queen, but it wasn't a marriage thing. Even though it says later on it's a marriage. Where did it say that? It said that I think it was near here. He celebrated highly the marriage of Esther. I have to strongly question this right here. There must be a bad translation, I believe. But because here's what we see. Esther was commanded by Mordecai to fear God and keep his commandments. And what are we told? We are told Esther did not change her manner of life. So she continued to fear God and keep God's commandments, even when she was with the king. So would Esther disobey the law and break the commandments of the law and marry a pagan? I don't believe that is true. So I believe the Septuagint is correct, that she was actually the wife of Mordecai, and this actually agrees. I don't really value rabbinic tradition too much. I don't have much value for them at all, but they have some interesting correspondences sometimes with other writings, and in the rabbinic tradition, they say themselves that Esther was married to Mordecai. This is stated by rabbis. So if you do research, you'll see that they also say the same thing. So it seems like they preserved this understanding, but even though the reading is changed, they preserve that understanding. Let's see. Is there anything else? Okay, verse 15 was the difference. Verse 15. See, and when the time was fulfilled for Esther, the daughter of Aminadab, the Hebrew says the daughter of Abihail. So I don't know why there's that difference there. I'm not sure which is the correct one. Now, let's see. And then again, let's see. Times. Hold on. I think it's from here. Okay. Okay, and once again, right here, we've got verse 20. Difference, you compare to verse 20. It says, Esther had not, in the Hebrew text, Esther had not showed her kindred nor her people as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. The Septuagint says, Now Esther had not discovered her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear God and perform his commandments, as when she was with him. And Esther changed not her manner of life. So that's some extra details. Either God was added in by the Greeks, or the reference to God and his commandments was taken out. And I believe it's so thoroughly mixed in that the references to God and the commandments and the Torah are so thoroughly mixed in throughout this Septuagint version. I have a hard time concluding that the scribes added the references to God. It doesn't make sense to me. And then right here, let's see. And when the king made an inquisition of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, the two chamberlains were both hanged on a tree, and the king gave orders to make written for a memorial in the book of the Chronicles before the king of the good offices of Mordecai as a commendation. What does Esther here say? Yeah, so see, looks like there's some extra details here. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So you see, there's some extra details. Now, we're going to move on to the next chapter. Chapter 3. And after this, King Artaxerxes highly honored Amon, son of Amadatha the Bugian, and exalted him, and set his seat above all his friends. And all in the palace did him obeisance, for so the king had given orders to do. But Mordecai did not do him obeisance. And they in the king's palace said to Mordecai, Mordecai, why dost thou transgress the commands of the king? They spoke daily to him, but he hearkened not unto them. So they represented to Amon that Mordecai resisted the commands of the king. And Mordecai had shown to them that he was a Jew. And when Haman understood that Mordecai did not obeisance to him, he was greatly enraged, and took counsel to destroy utterly all the Jews who were under the rule of Artaxerxes. And he made a decree in the 12th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, and cast lots daily and monthly to slay in one day the race of Mordecai, and the lot fell on the 14th of the month, which is Adar. And he spoke to King Artaxerxes, saying, there is a nation scattered among the nations in all thy kingdom, and their laws differ from all the nations, and they disobey the laws of the king. And it is not expedient for the king to let them alone. If it seem good to the king, let him make a decree to destroy them, and I will remit into the king's treasury 10,000 talents of silver. And the king took off his ring and gave it into the hands of Amon to seal the decrees against the Jews. And the king said to Amon, keep the silver and treat the nation as thou wilt. So the king's recorders were called in the first month on the 13th, and they wrote as Haman commanded to the captains and governors in every province, from India even to Ethiopia, to 127 provinces, and to the rulers of the nations according to their languages in the name of King Artaxerxes. And it was sent by post throughout the kingdom of Artaxerxes to destroy utterly the race of the Jews on the first day of the 12th month, which is Adar, and to plunder their goods. And then it gives the letter right here. I'll read that in a second. So then it says at the end right here, and the copies of the letters were published in every province, and an order was given to all the nations to be ready against that day. And the business was hastened in at Susa, and the king and Haman began to drink, but the city was troubled. So now, take a look at this. In chapter 3 of the Hebrew text, we've got this. It says that the letters were sent out. Letters were sent out. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. So it tells us about a letter, but nowhere is the letter given in our versions. But in the Septuagint version, that letter is given. And so it seems to me very likely that this letter is authentic, because it clearly says right here that there was a letter that was written. So we are to believe the Book of Esther that there was a letter. And what happened to that letter? Did it just cease to exist? We have no copy of it. But here it claims to be a very copy of that letter. And I see no reason to doubt the authenticity of this letter. It seems more likely that people would just remove this letter because you don't really need this letter for the story, to understand the story. Because we were told the summary of the contents of what the letter would tell us. Right here, we have the letter contents summary, so we don't really need to know the exact words of the letter. So I could see easily why a scribe would remove that. So now I'm going to read that letter right here. And the following is a copy of the letter. The great King Artaxerxes writes thus to the rulers and inferior governors of 127 provinces, from India even to Ethiopia, who hold authority underneath. Ruling over many nations and having obtained dominion over the whole world, I was minded, not elated by the confidence of power, but ever conducting with great moderation and gentleness, to make the lives of subjects continually tranquil, desiring both to maintain the kingdom quiet and orderly to utmost limits, and to restore the peace desired by all men. But when I had inquired of my counselors how this should be brought to pass, Haman, who excels in soundness of judgment among us, and has been manifestly well inclined, without wavering, and with unshaken fidelity, and has obtained the second post in the kingdom, informed us that a certain ill-disposed people is mixed up with all the tribes throughout the world, opposed in their law to every nation, and continually neglecting the commands of the king, so that the united government blamelessly administered by us is not quietly established. Having then conceived that this nation is continually set in opposition to every man, introducing as a change a foreign code of laws, and injuriously plotting to accomplish the worst of evils against our interests, and against the happy establishment of the monarchy, we signified to you, in the letter written by Haman, who is set over affairs and is our second governor, to destroy them all utterly with their wives and children by the swords of the enemies, without pitying or sparing any, on the 14th day of the 12th month Adar of the present year, that the people aforetime and now ill-disposed, having been violently consigned to death in one day, may hereafter secure to us continually a well-constituted and quietness. So that was the contents of the letter. So that whole letter is not in the Hebrew manuscripts, but it is in the Greek manuscripts. Now, let's see some of these differences here. So here's an interesting difference right here in verse 7. It says in verse 7, in the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. But in the Septuagint version of verse 7, it says, and he made a decree in the 12th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, and cast lots daily and monthly to slay in one day the race of Mordecai, and the lot fell on the 14th of the month, which is Adar. So there's some extra details right there. Let's see. Then we've got some of these extra details right here, not in the Masoretic text. As I said, the whole letter right here is not in the Masoretic text. It's not in the Hebrew copies. And also, just so you guys know, there's a version of this in let's see, hold on. Yeah, the one that I have underlined is the version that I did, when you see the underlinings. So now you see there's another version of the Septuagint that is from very ancient times and has some additional readings that are not even found in the Septuagint version. There's some extra stuff. And I translated it from Latin. It's not in English in any other translation that I'm aware of, but I translated some of these portions. So here's what I translated. Right here at the very end of the letter, this part is from the Old Latin version of the Septuagint of Esther. So, peoples who moreover support the habitations of the Jews, Not only with men, but with portents shall they be burned with fire, and their substances taken away from them. So that's in Old Latin manuscripts. And then this right here, I translated this, and this is from Old Latin manuscripts. It's not in the Septuagint, but it is in the Old Latin. And the Jews called the God of their fathers, and they said, O Lord God, you alone are God in heaven above, and there is no other God but thee. If truly we fulfilled thy law and precepts, we should dwell perhaps with peace all the time of our lives. But now, since we have not done thy precepts, this tribulation has come upon us all. Thou art just and tranquil, and the most high and great, O Lord, art thou, and all the judgments of thy ways. And now, O God, do not give thy sons into captivity, nor into the violation of our lives, nor into destruction. The one who hast been merciful to us from Egypt, and continuing now, pity thy firstborn. Spare thou, and give not our inheritance into the spreading of insanity, so that enemies dominate us. And Susan, the palace, in the city close to the king, it was intended as an example, and the notifications were written. So that's chapter 3. You saw those clear, many differences there. So now we go to chapter 4. But Mordecai, having perceived what was done, rent his garments and put on sackcloth, and sprinkled dust upon himself. And having rushed forth through the open street of the city, he cried with a loud voice, A nation that has done no wrong is going to be destroyed. And he came to the king's gate and stood, for it was not lawful for him to enter into the palace wearing sackcloth and ashes. And in every palace where the letters were published, there was crying and lamentation and great mourning on the part of the Jews. They spread for themselves sackcloth and ashes. And the queen's maids and chamberlains went in and told her. And when she had heard what was done, she was disturbed, and she sent to clothe Mordecai and take away his sackcloth, but he consented not. So Esther called for her chamberlain Acratheus, who waited upon her, and she sent to learn the truth from Mordecai. And Mordecai showed him what was done, and the promise which Aman had made the king of 10,000 talents into the treasury, that he might destroy the Jews. And he gave him the copy that was published in Susa concerning their destruction to show to Esther, and told him to charge her to go in and entreat the king, and to beg him for the people, remembering the days of thy low estate, how thou wert nursed by my hand, because Haman, who holds the next place to the king, has spoken against us for death. Do thou call upon the Lord, and speak to the king concerning us, and deliver us from death. So Acratheus went in and told her all these words. And Esther said to Acratheus, Go to Mordecai and say, All the nations of the empire know, and that whoever, man or woman, shall go in to the king into the inner court uncalled, that person cannot live. Only to whomsoever the king shall stretch out golden scepter, he shall live. And I have not been called to go into the king for these 30 days. And Acratheus reported to Mordecai all the words of Esther. Then Mordecai said to Acratheus, Go and say to her, Esther, say not to thyself that thou alone will escape in the kingdom, more than all the Jews. For if thou shalt refuse to hearken on this occasion, help and protection will be to the Jews from another quarter. But thou and thy father's house will perish. And who knows if thou hast been made queen for this occasion? And Esther sent that came to her to Mordecai, saying, Go and assemble the Jews that are in Susa, and fast ye for me, and eat not and drink not for 3 days, night and day. And I also and my maidens will fast. And then I will go into the king, contrary to the law, even if I must die. So Mordecai went and did all that Esther commanded him. And now we have a special prayer that's not in our versions. And he besought the Lord, making mention of all the works of the Lord, and he said, Lord God, ruling over all, for all things are in thy power, and there is no one that shall oppose thee in thy purpose to save Israel. For thou hast made the heaven and the earth, and every wonderful thing in it under heaven. And thou art Lord of all, and there is no one who shall resist thee, Lord. Thou knowest all things. Thou knowest, Lord, that it is not in insolence, nor haughtiness, nor love of glory that I have done this, to refuse obeisance to the haughty Haman. For I would gladly have kissed the soles of his feet, for the safety of Israel. But I have done this that I might not set the glory of man above the glory of God. And I will not worship any one except thee, my Lord, and I will not do these things in haughtiness. And now, O Lord God, the King, the God of Abraham, spare thy people, for they are looking upon us to destruction, and they have desired to destroy thine ancient inheritance. Do not overlook thy peculiar people, whom thou hast redeemed for thyself out of the land of Egypt. Hearken to my prayer, and be propitious to thine inheritance, and turn our mourning into gladness, that we may live and sing praise to thy name, O Lord, and do not utterly destroy the mouth of them that praise thee, O Lord. And all Israel cried with their might, for death was before their eyes. And Queen Esther betook herself for refuge to the Lord, being taken in the agony of death. And having taken off her glorious apparel, she put on garments of distress and mourning. And instead of grand perfumes, she filled her head with ashes and dung. It should say dust, not dung. It's a bad translation. And she greatly brought down her body, and she filled every place of her glad adorning with the curls of her hair. And she besought the Lord God of Israel, and said, O my Lord, thou alone art our King. Help me destitute, and have no helper but thee. For my danger is near at hand. I have heard from my birth in the tribe of my kindred that thou, Lord, tookest Israel out of all the nations, and our fathers out of all their kindred for a perpetual inheritance, and hast wrought for them all that thou hast said. And now we have sinned before thee, and thou hast delivered us into the hands of our enemies, because we honored their gods. Thou art righteous, O Lord, but now they have not been contented with the bitterness of our slavery, but have laid their hands on the hands of their idols, to abolish the decree of thy mouth, and to utterly destroy thine inheritances, and to stop the mouth of them that praise thee, and to extinguish the glory of thine house and thine altar, and to open the mouth of the Gentiles to the praises of vanities, and that a mortal king should be admired forever. O Lord, do not resign thy scepter to them that are not, and let them not laugh at our fall, but turn their counsel against themselves, and make an example of him who has begun to injure us. Remember, O Lord, manifest thyself in the time of our affliction, and encourage me, O King of gods and ruler of all dominion. Put harmonious speech into my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate him that fights against us, to the utter destruction of him that consent with him. But deliver us by thine hand, and help me, the destitute one, and have nothing but thee, O Lord. Thou knowest all things, and knowest that I hate the glory of transgressors, and that I abhor the couch of the uncircumcised, and of every stranger. Thou knowest my necessity, for I abhor the symbol of my proud station, which is upon my head in the days of my splendor. I abhor it as a menstruous cloth, and I wear it not in the days of my tranquility. And thy handmaid has not eaten the table of Haman, and I have not honored the banquet of the king. Neither have I drunk wine of libations. Neither has thy handmaid rejoiced since the day of my promotion until now, except in thee, O Lord God of Abraham, O God who has power over all. Hearken to the voice of the desperate, and deliver us from the hand of them that devise mischief, and deliver me from my fear. So that was from chapter 4 of the Septuagint, an extra prayer that Esther made that's not in the Hebrew version. So now let's compare these differences here. Let's see, in verse 1, we've got a nation that has done no wrong is going to be destroyed. That's not in the Hebrew text that we're familiar with. All it says there is, he went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. It doesn't say what he cried, but the Septuagint does. It says, a people or a nation that has done no wrong is going to be destroyed. Then an interesting thing right here is in verse 2, it says, he went out to the king, he went before the king's gate. None can enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. But look right here in verse 1, it says, he put on sackcloth and with ashes. But here it just says, none can enter who are clothed with sackcloth. But what about the ashes? Well, according to the Septuagint, it gave that extra detail. The scribes must have thought in the Hebrew version, oh, we don't really need that detail. The point is being made, so we'll just remove that extra clause. And now let's see here. This right here, I translated this from the Old Latin. This is not in the Septuagint, but this is in Old Latin manuscripts. It says, and when Queen Esther heard the cry of her brother Mordecai in Hebrew, so that's an interesting addition right there. And then also, let's see what the Septuagint says in verse 4. It says, and the queen's maids and chamberlains went in and told her, and when she had heard what was done, she was disturbed, and she sent to clothe Mordecai and take away his sackcloth, but he consented not. Right here, this is in the Old Latin version, I believe. That's where I got it from. It's right here. You see, it says it's not part of her speech. It just says she sent to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth. But in the Old Latin version, it says, and said, she's talking to the person that she sent, take away his sackcloth from him and bring, these are extra words, and bring him in that I might know what my brother desires, because I hear the voice of my brother, a great voice of distress and mourning, and the tears and anguish and of necessity. Now, once again, verse 7, it says in Hebrew, and Mordecai told him of all that happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. No reference of how much, but in the Septuagint, of 10,000 talents. An extra detail we don't really need to know, so the scribes removed that. Now, let's see. So here's an interesting one right here. This is extra stuff not in the Hebrew text. It says, thus you will say to her, do not turn away from going to the king and flattering his person for the sake of me and my people, remembering the days of thy low estate. Goes all the way through the rest of that. Now, here's an interesting one right here. See right here, we've got verse 10. It says, you have the extra word here, go, and this extra word in say. And then right here, haytak, that extra, the name of the person. And then here's another one, go and answer to. So it's changing the conversation. It's changing who's saying things. Like right here, Esther bade the one that came to her return to Mordecai. But the other version says, then Esther bade Mordecai. It's a different reference of who's speaking to who. So it's just kind of interesting to see all the different readings. Let's see, verse 10. Right here, Esther said to Acritheos, go to Mordecai and say, what does this say? And again, Esther spake unto Hachath and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. So this one says, go and say to him, all the king's servants, and right here we've got all the king's servants right here. So in the Hebrew version, this is just being stated to us as a detail, just so you guys know, whoever's reading this, this is the case. But in the Greek version, that's actually part of the conversation that's being had. Then in verse 12, what do we see? Verse 12, and they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Septuagint says, and Acritheos reported to Mordecai all the words of Esther. It says then in 13, 13 says, then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. Here it says, then Mordecai said to Acritheos, go and say to her, Esther. So we see that the scribes of the Hebrew version felt it was unnecessary to include this akrotheos person in the dialogue. They just shortened it. They abbreviated to be a conversation between Esther and Mordecai. They removed the middleman that was conveying the message. So it just shows you the shortcuts the scribes were taking. Verse 15 right here. Then Esther bade return Mordecai. What does the Hebrew text say? And she said, Esther, to return unto Mordecai. So that seems very short and missing stuff, but the Septuagint says, and Esther sent the one that came to her to Mordecai, saying. So we've got those extra details there. Now, right here, let's see here. He besought. One moment. He besought the Lord. Okay, so right here, these words right here. These are from the Old Latin as well. I translated this again. So it says, the Old Latin version of the Septuagint, and Mordecai went and he preached propriety. Moreover, bridegrooms of the marriage bed and their brides of pasture came out. Moreover, elders and crones went out to pray. It was commanded that beasts and cattle not eat 3 days and 3 nights. Moreover, they all took ashes and called upon the Most High God that he would make forgiveness for humility. So just so you guys know, this 3 days and 3 nights for animals, that may sound strange, but we find that in the book of Jonah. It says the same thing. And it also says the same thing in the book of Judith. So we've got multiple examples in Scripture of animals being commanded also to participate in the fasting. Because it's community. It's considered a community thing that everyone's supposed to participate in it. Now, then as I said before, we have the prayer of Mordecai, which is not in our Hebrew text. There's no hint of a prayer because it seems like the references to God and religion and stuff like that were removed. Any hint of that was removed from the Hebrew text. But it is in the Septuagint version. And now, there was also Esther's prayer. And what's very interesting about these prayers is it actually proves a lot of false interpretations. Like I saw the other day, I don't remember what it was, but it made Mordecai look like an obnoxious, arrogant person who was so prideful of himself. But because he wasn't willing to bow down. This was like a reinterpretation of someone who was interpreting the story of Esther. But that gets this whole thing wrong because Mordecai himself tells us, he says, I would have been happy to bow down to Haman. I would have gladly done it for the sake of Israel. But I did not because God commands us not to do that. That's a sin. So we see that there's a righteousness of Mordecai. Mordecai was righteous. Now, in Esther's prayer, we also see something interesting, that Esther, she defends herself about keeping the laws of Moses. We see how she did not eat the sinful food. She did not disobey the commandments. She says, I abhor the couch of the uncircumcised. So she hates that to me implies that she was not sleeping with the king because she abhors the bed of an uncircumcised man. She does not eat the food that the king gives her to eat. And she says that neither has thy handmaid rejoiced since the day of my promotion until now, except in thee, O Lord God of Abraham. So she's basically defending herself and saying she's been a righteous woman, even in this situation, which changes the whole story. Because the way that other people tell the story, that Esther was married to the king and tried to live, she lived as if she was a pagan. She made it look like she was no different from pagans. She just lived her life pretending to be a Gentile. But according to the Septuagint of Esther, she was still keeping the commandments of God, and she did not violate her conscience just to pretend that she was not a Jew. So it completely changes the emphasis of the story. Now, also, there's something else in the Old Latin version, not in the Septuagint version, that's part of Esther's prayer, and I translated that as well. And here's what it says. I heard that thou didst save Noah during the water of the flood. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst deliver 9 kings to Abraham within 318 men. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst rescue Jonah from the belly of the fish. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst deliver Ananiah, Azariah, and Mishael from the fiery furnace. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst rescue Daniel from the den of the lions. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst condemn Hezekiah, king of the Jews, to die, but he was praying for the life of mercy, and thou didst give unto him a life of 15 years. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst give a generation of a son for Hannah, who sought into a desire of life. I heard in the books of my fathers, O God, that thou didst liberate for thee the complacent ones unto the end. And now, and then this is back in the Septuagint version, all this part of her prayer. So we see right here also she talks about the glory of the temple and the altar. So it's all full of religion and God and references to his name. It's very amazing, the clear, striking difference. Let's see here. And then this final thing, I also translated this from Old Latin. O God, who has power over all, hearken to the voice of the desperate, and deliver us from the hand of them that devise mischief, and deliver me. Turn our mourning into joy, moreover, our sorrows into mirth. Arising, moreover, above your share, God, make thou public. Uncover thou, O Lord. Know my fear, O Lord. So you see there's a lot of... wait, hold on. The voice of the desperate, deliver us from the hand that devise mischief. Okay, so this one part, I didn't translate this part, but this part I translated. So just to clarify. So those are some very interesting differences. Now we go to chapter 5. And we're going to see a striking difference here. Chapter 5 is pretty short in the Hebrew version, but it's longer in the Septuagint. And it came to pass on the 3rd day, when she had ceased praying, that she put off her mean dress and put on her glorious apparel. And being splendidly arrayed, having called upon God, the overseer and preserver of all things, she took her 2 maids, and she leaned upon one as a delicate female, and the other followed bearing her train. And she was blooming in the perfection of her beauty, and her face was cheerful and benevolent, but her heart was straitened for fear. And having passed through all the doors, she stood before the king, and he was sitting upon his royal throne, and he had put on all his glorious apparel, all over with gold and precious stones, and was very terrible. And having raised his face resplendent with glory, he looked with intense anger. And the queen fell and changed her color as she fainted, and she bowed herself upon the head of the maid that went before. But God changed the spirit of the king into gentleness, and in intense feeling he sprang from off his throne and took her into his arms until she recovered. And he comforted her with peaceable words and said to her, What is it, Esther? I am thy brother. Be of good cheer. Thou shalt not die, for our command is openly declared. Draw nigh. And having raised the golden scepter, he laid it upon her neck and embraced her and said, Speak to me. And she said to him, I saw thee, Lord, as an angel of God. My heart was troubled for fear of thy glory. For thou, Lord, art to be wondered at, and thy face is full of grace. And while she was speaking, she fainted and fell. Then the king was troubled, and all his servants comforted her. And the king said, What wilt thou, Esther, and what is thy request? Even to the half of my kingdom, and it shall be thine. And Esther said, Today is my great day. If then it seem good to the king, let both him and Haman come to the feast which I will prepare this day. And the king said, Hasten Haman hither, that we may perform the word of Esther. So they both came to the feast of which Esther had spoken. And at the banquet the king said to Esther, What is it, Queen Esther? And thou shalt have all that thou requirest. And she said, My request and my petition. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, let the king and Haman come again tomorrow to the feast which I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do the same. So Haman went out from the king very glad, merry. But when Haman saw Mordecai the Jew in the court, he was greatly enraged. And having gone into his own house, he called his friends and his wife Zosara, and he showed them his wealth and the glory with which the king had invested him, and how he had caused him to take precedence and bear chief rule in the kingdom. And Haman said, The queen has called no one to the feast with the king but me, and I am invited tomorrow. But these things please me not, while I see Mordecai the Jew in the court. And Zosara his wife and his friends said to him, Let there be a gallows made for thee of 50 cubits, and in the morning do thou speak to the king, and let Mordecai be hanged on the gallows. But do thou go into the feast with the king and be merry. And the saying pleased Haman, and the gallows were prepared. I assume it should be were. But maybe it was, I don't know. Now, I underline the differences in the Septuagint version, and I also translated from the Old Latin text, some extra stuff in the Old Latin. So right here, she put off her mean dress and washed her body with water and anointed herself with anointing. And that's from the Old Latin. I translated that. And then, let's see here. So all this extra stuff right here, none of that's in the pretty much none of that's in the Masoretic. See, like right here, verse 1, this part and this, and then right here, verse 6 is part of the Hebrew text, and then all the way down to here, and then here is where the Hebrew text goes. See, look, it says, so Esther drew near, touched the top of the scepter. And then verse 3, then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? See, it skips everything else. But in the Septuagint version, we've got the whole thing right here of all the extra detail. The scribes thought, okay, we don't really need all that extra detail. We might as well remove it. And let's see. Right here, I translated this from the Old Latin. Once again, this is not in the Septuagint, but this is in Old Latin manuscripts. So it says, and the king desired to destroy her, and he was waverly crying, and he said, Who is the one who dared enter into the royal court without liberty? So we see that she faints, but then it says, God changed the spirit of the king into gentleness. And in intense feeling, he sprang from off his throne. See, all that stuff, none of this is in the Hebrew text. It just goes right away. She goes in. It says, she went in, the king saw Esther, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter. So basically, it skips the whole drama of how she got favor. It was God who changed his spirit so that she would have favor in his eyes. So it seems like God has been removed from the Book of Esther. Let's see here. So, some extra details here. Now here, verse 27. Take a look at, hold on. Oh, I think I added, I added verses. I added numbered verses. So this is the final verse. Verse 14. Then said Zeresh, his wife, wait, where is it? No, yeah. So we see, then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made, and all that other stuff. But nothing about God or anything about his Jewishness. But now, we look here, he says, He is from the race of the Jews. Since the king has allowed you to destroy the Jews, and the gods have given you a destruction to take revenge on them, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits. So the scribes thought, okay, we don't need that stuff. The point is, she's telling him to make a gallows, so they removed that. Plus, it mentions the gods, the pagan gods, and the Jewish people. So now we go to the next chapter. That's chapter 6. Let's see here. All right. There's 10 chapters in all. But the Lord removed sleep from the king that night, and he told his servant to bring in the books, the registers of daily events, to read to him. And he found the records written concerning Mordecai, how he had told the king concerning the 2 chamberlains of the king when they were keeping guard and sought to lay hands on Artaxerxes. And the king said, what honor or favor have we done to Mordecai? And the king's servants said, thou hast not done anything to him. And while the king was inquiring about the kindness of Mordecai, behold, Haman was in the court. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come in to speak to the king that he should hang Mordecai on the gallows, which he had prepared. And the king's servants said, behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, call him. And the king said to Haman, what shall I do to the man whom I wish to honor? And Haman said within himself, whom would the king honor but myself? And he said to the king, as for the man whom the king wishes to honor, let the king's servants bring the robe of fine linen which the king puts on, and the horse on which the king rides, and let him give to one of the king's nobles' friends, and let him array the man whom the king loves, and let him mount him on the horse, and proclaim through the street of the city, saying, thus shall it be to every man whom the king honors. Then the king said to Haman, thou hast well said. So do to Mordecai the Jew, who awaits in the palace, and let not a word of what thou hast spoken be neglected. So Haman took the robe and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and mounted him on the horse, and went through the street of the city, and proclaimed, saying, thus shall it be to every man whom the king wishes to honor. And Mordecai returned to the palace, but Haman went home mourning and having his head covered. And Haman related the events that had befallen him to Zosara, his wife, and to friends. And his friends and his wife said to him, if Mordecai is of the race of the Jews, thou hast begun to be humbled before him. Thou wilt assuredly fall, and thou wilt not be able to withstand him, for the living God is with him. While they were yet speaking, the chamberlains arrived to hasten Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Now, let's see chapter 6 here. Look at this. At the very beginning, we've got a striking difference here. It says, on that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. Here we see, but the Lord kept on that night sleep from the king, and he commanded his servant to bring. So you see, God was disturbing his sleep. But because the scribes wanted to remove God from the story, they removed that detail. Then here's an extra thing. I think this is, yeah, this is from, let's see here. 1 second here. Who is in the court? Yeah. So this extra stuff is from the Alpha text, I believe it is, the Alpha manuscripts, which you saw here. So that is chapter 6. So let's see here. Hold on. Right here. See, right here it says in verse 4, while the king was inquiring about Mordecai's goodwill, look, Haman was in the courtyard. The king said, who is in the courtyard? So right here we see the king asked, who is outside? And it was Haman. Right here, this is extra words And right here also, we got here, and he found the entries written, what honor or distinction, it says, what honor or distinction have we bestowed on Mordecai? King's servant said, you have done nothing for him. It says but in the Alpha version it says, and the king thought seriously on that matter, saying, Mordecai is a loyal man for protecting my life, for he has kept me alive even until now, and I am sitting on my throne today and have done nothing for him. I have not done right by him. So that's a striking difference in the two versions right there. Now, let's see. Verse 12. Let's look at verse 12 here. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. Wait, hold on. Oh, that's right. There's extra verses, so my bad. This will be, where was this? Let the king's servant bring the one. Haman answered the king, right here. It's verse 8. So we've got, let the king's servants bring the royal apparel, which the king wears. Let the royal apparel be brought. It doesn't say who's bringing it. So that's an extra detail in the Septuagint version. It's just things like that. They're extra details, which there's no point really for a scribe to add. It makes sense for scribes to remove it. Verse 14, or it wouldn't be 14. It would be, let's see, this was 8, 9, 10. So verse 10, let's check that one. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. We've got this extra detail. It says, make haste. But in the Greek Septuagint, it says, thou hast well said. So there's just some amazing things of extra details. Let's see. That was in verse 10. Thou hast well said. So do to Mordecai. Now let me see here. Now these are from this is from Alpha text, not from the Septuagint. So we're going to find that right here. See right here? This is Alpha. So we've got, it says, and Haman took the robe and the horse. Wait, it's right here. Now, when Haman realized that it was not he himself who would be extolled, but that it was Mordecai, his heart was utterly broken, and his spirit became feeble. And Haman took the robe and the horse, showing reverence to Mordecai even on the very same day on which he intended to impale him. And he said to Mordecai, tear off the sackcloth. And Mordecai was distressed as one dying, and with anguish he took off the sackcloth and put on the garments of glory. And Mordecai thought he saw a sign. His heart was toward the Lord, and he was mystified in silent fear. And Haman hastened to put him on horseback. And Haman led the horse outside and went before him, proclaiming, thus shall it be done for the man who honors the king, whom the king wishes to extol. And so Haman went to his place downhearted, and Mordecai went to his home. Haman explained to his wife everything that had happened to him. Let's see. Then we see right here, in the Hebrew text, it says, once again, there's a difference of wise men versus friends. The Septuagint translates as friends. We saw that earlier, that difference of interpretation. Once again, it's here. So it says, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. You've got this extra detail right here. of what she said to him, and thou wilt not be able to withstand him, for the living God is with him. Again, the reference to God has been removed in the Hebrew text. And then finally, at the very end, it says, and so he was cheered up, and when he had covered the distance, he reclined with them on time. That's, I think that's from, yeah, this is from the Alpha text as well. So, now we go to chapter 7. We're getting close to the end here. Hopefully you guys can stay for the finish. Chapter 7 looks pretty short here. Let's see, 8's a longer one, and 10 is short. So we've got a long chapter 8, but otherwise the other, and 9 is kind of a little long, but 8 and 10, excuse me, 7 and 10 are pretty short. So here, so the king and Haman went in to drink with the queen. And the king said to Esther at the banquet on the second day, what is it, Queen Esther, and what is thy request, and what is thy petition? And it shall be for thee, to the half of my kingdom. And she answered and said, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, let life be granted to my petition, and my people to my request. For both I and my people are sold for destruction and pillage and slavery, we and our children for bondmen and bondwomen. And I consented not to it, for the slanderer is not worthy of the king's palace. And the king said, Who is this that has dared to do this thing? And Esther said, the adversary is Haman, this wicked man. Then Haman was troubled before the king and the queen. And the king rose up from the banquet to go into the garden. And Haman began to entreat the queen, for he saw that he was in an evil case. And the king returned from the garden, and Haman had fallen upon the bed, entreating the queen. And the king said, wilt thou even force wife or woman in my house? Because as I said, I don't believe they're married. And wife and woman in Hebrew is the same. It does not say my wife. It just says wife. So really it should be a woman, I believe. And the king said, wilt thou even force a woman in my house? And when Haman heard it, he changed countenance. And Mugathan, one of the chamberlains, said to the king, behold, Haman has also prepared a gallows for Mordecai, who spoke concerning the king, and a gallows of 50 cubits high has been set up in the premises of Haman. And the king said, let him be hanged thereon. So Haman was hanged on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath was appeased. So now we go to chapter 7 here. So again, the Hebrew text is only 10 verses long. And now let's check. Let's see, that is verse 3. Let's check. That's from, what is that from? That's in the Alpha text, I think, right here. Yep. Esther struggled with her reply because the adversary was before her eyes, and God gave her courage as she called upon him. That's that right there. Now look right here. Here's another example of the scribes shortening things, extra details, just for the sake of condensing the narrative with unnecessary details, they thought. So verse 5. Wait, is it? No, it's verse 4. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen, look right here. But if we and our children have been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, some scribes probably thought, we don't really need and our children. It kind of seems unnecessary. Why can't we just say, but if we, because she said, I and my people. Aren't their children part of their people? So why do you need to say if we and our children? It doesn't seem to make sense. So the scribes, okay, let's remove that. We don't need that. If we had been sold, in reality, the original said if we and our children. Because we have to remember, Esther was a regular woman, just like all of us. And sometimes when we say things, sometimes we're redundant. We give unnecessary details. This happens many times to myself and other people. We say things we don't need to say, or we say things incorrectly. So I see no issue with this, if we and our children. That's what she said in a time of distress. That's what the words that came to her mind, if we and our children. Now, let's see here, verse 5. And the king answered and said unto Esther the queen. Then the king became angry and answered. You see that in the, let's see here. That's in the alpha text as well, I think. Yeah, became angry. Then we've got, here is also from the alpha text, not in the Septuagint either. It says, "Who is this who dared to humiliate the sign of my right?" That's in the other version, I think. But this, when the queen saw that it seemed a great offense to the king, and that he hated evil, she said, "Do not be angry, Lord, for it is enough that I have found your conciliation. Enjoy your meal, O king, and tomorrow I will do according to your word." But the king swore that she must tell him who was so arrogant to do this, and with an oath he took it upon himself to do for her whatever she wished. So Esther was emboldened and said, "Haman, your friend, is this liar, this evil man." So we see there's a whole extra thing of Esther saying, she basically says, "Just enjoy your meal. I'll tell you tomorrow. Don't worry. Let's do this tomorrow." It shows how fearful and afraid she is. She doesn't want to push it too much. But then the king says, "No, you must tell me now." That seems like she already got the king to agree, so it just seems to make more sense to remove that extra plea, because it makes Esther look kind of silly to even say it again, "Wait until tomorrow." So they removed that to make Esther look better. And because it was kind of it wasn't needed to get the point across, because we see, as we saw, the king said, "No, you must tell me now." So rather than giving that extra little plot line, they just skipped right to where, "Okay, I'll tell you." It says she was emboldened and said, but in the other version says, "and Esther said." So the alpha text adds the fact that she was emboldened. She was emboldened because the king said that. She said, "No." So she saw, okay, the king is on my side, so I can say. Then what's interesting is also verse 11. Verse 11, which is wait, hold on. Okay, so this would be verse 6, 7, 8, verse 8, I think it is. Yeah. "Will he force the queen also before me in the house?" There's an extra thing is it in the Septuagint, or is it, let's see. Yeah, it's not in the Septuagint. It's once again in the alpha text where it says, "A crime against my kingdom is not enough for you." So we see that extra clause from the alpha. And then this also is another thing. "Let Haman be led away and let him not live." That's also from the alpha text. So there's just some extra details here, which is very interesting. Now, we go on to chapter 8. "And in that day King Artaxerxes gave to Esther all that belonged to Haman the slanderer, and Mordecai was called by the king, for Esther had shown that he was related to her. And the king took the ring which he had taken away from Haman and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over all that had been Haman's. And she spoke yet again to the king, and fell at his feet, and besought to do away the mischief of Haman, and all that he had done against the Jews. Then the king stretched out to Esther the golden scepter, and Esther arose to stand near the king. And Esther said, If it seem good to thee, and I have found favor, let an order be sent that the letters sent by Haman may be reversed, that were written for the destruction of the Jews who are in thy kingdom. For how shall I be able to look upon the affliction of my people, and how shall I be able to survive the destruction of my kindred? And the king said to Esther, If I have given and freely granted thee all that was Haman's, and hanged him on a gallows, because he laid his hands upon the Jews, what dost thou yet further seek? Write ye also in my name, as it seems good to you, and seal with my ring. For whatever are written at the command of the king, and sealed with my ring, it is not lawful to gainsay them. So the scribes were called in the first month, which is Nisan, on the 23rd day of the same year, and it was written to the Jews, whatever commanded to the local governors and chiefs of the satraps, from India even to Ethiopia, 127 satraps, according to the several provinces, according to their dialects. And they were written by order of the king and sealed with his ring, and they sent the letters by the posts, wherein he charged them to use their laws in every city, and to help each other, and to treat their adversaries and those who attacked them as they pleased. On one day in all the kingdom of Artaxerxes, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is Adar. And let the copies be posted in conspicuous places throughout the kingdom, and let all the Jews be ready against this day to fight against their enemies. And then it gives the letter. Well, I'll read that in a second. But first I'll say, so the horsemen went forth and with haste to perform the king's commands, and the ordinance was also published in Susa. And Mordecai went forth, robed in the royal apparel, and wearing a golden crown and a diadem of fine purple linen. And the people in Susa saw and rejoiced. And the Jews had light and gladness in every city and province wherever the ordinance was published. Wherever the proclamation took place, the Jews had joy and gladness, feasting and mirth. And many of the Gentiles were circumcised and became Jews for fear of the Jews. So something important to note, first of all, is Haman was the one who wrote the letter earlier. So the king had no idea what he was doing. He did not realize that he was, when Haman asked him to allow him to write a letter, he said he trusted Haman and said, okay, I trust you with this judgment. You say there's some evil people, so write a letter about this. So Haman wrote a letter in the king's name that the Jews must be destroyed. The king was not aware that this was a slander against the Jews. Once he realized the truth, he allowed Esther and Mordecai to write in his name. So in both cases, the letters are not written by the king himself, but by other people. I read some what the scholars say about the letter that I'm about to read to you in this chapter, and they have a very silly accusation. They try to say this letter is not authentic because it praises too much Judaism and the religion of the Jews. And the king would not praise the religion of the Jews. So this can't be true. Well, this can't be an authentic letter of the king. But what they are missing, because they're so focused on trying to dismiss the authenticity of these extra details, is that it clearly states that they were writing as pretending to be the king. They were writing in his name. So these were Jews writing a letter on behalf of the king, but they could say whatever they want. So they were writing about they wanted the people to think Judaism was a good thing. So they were very sneaky about it and added in the reference to you should follow religion, or not you should follow, but they wrote about how the religion of the Jews is a good thing and stuff like that. So they kind of pushed the envelope a little bit with what they wrote. But so that's why the letter sounds so Jewish, because it was written by Jews, as the text clearly says. So that objection of scholars is proven to be not a good argument at all. Now let's see here. I think this is from the Alpha text again. Yeah. He even planned to hang Mordecai, who saved me from the hand of the eunuchs. Did he not know that Esther is of his race? Now let's see, verse 4, or maybe it's verse 3. Let me see here. And she spoke yet again to the king, and fell at his feet, and besought to do away the mischief of Haman, and all that he had done against the Jews. He says in the next one, let an order be sent that the letters be reversed. Now let's see what, see here. Yeah, so this extra stuff right here is, where is it? It's, that's in the, also in the alpha text as well, where it says, what do you want? I will do it for you. And Mordecai said that you revoke Haman's letter. Then, let's see here. Then we see okay, the Septuagint I think says the same basic thing. Wait, hold on one moment, please. Oh yeah, no, okay. So this is from the alpha text where Mordecai is saying revoke the letter, and then Esther says the same thing. But in the alpha text it differs. It has more. So it has in the alpha text it has Mordecai saying that, and then Esther doesn't say revoke the letter. Esther says something else. Now, what does Esther say in the alpha text? She says, allow me to punish my enemies with bloodshed. It sounds to me like that's an original, that sounds authentic to me. That sounds pretty horrible, because bloodshed usually has a connotation of murder or killing, you know, horrible actions. So it would seem a good reason for scribes to be uncomfortable with that language and to remove it. So it's in the alpha text that she's asking, allow me to punish my enemies with bloodshed. I find it hard to believe that the scribe would add that idea, because that language kind of makes it look, oh dear, that's not good. So basically, this makes it look like the Jews can kill their enemies with bloodshed, and that's a very scary thing for people. A lot of people think the Jews are a lot of evil. So people, when they would hear this kind of language, they would be very fearful of the Jews, which would be a good reason for scribes to remove it so that people don't get the wrong idea that the Jews are wanting to kill people. Now, let's see. Another thing it says, get the verse. It says of the same year in this verse. It doesn't say that here in the Hebrew text, though. It says that in the oh, this is interesting right here. Wait a minute. So take a look at this. We've got here, then were the king's scribes called at the time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day. Here we see, so the scribes were called in the 1st month, which is Nisan, on the 23rd day. That's kind of really strange. It's clear that they changed, the scribes did an intentional change. Either the original said Nisan and they changed it to Sivan, or it said Sivan and they changed it. Like, let me see. Sivan is spelled right here. I think Nisan has an N at the beginning, and then it looks very similar at the end. Now, so here's an interesting thing. The verse in This is verse 11, I think. The king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together and to stand for their life. What do we say here? Wherein he charged the Jews to use their laws in every city and to gather themselves together. So the reference to the laws of the Jews was removed in the Hebrew version, but not in the Greek text. Let's see. To use their laws in every city. Now, I'm going to read the letter to you guys. Wait, hold on 1 second. Who's talking here? Okay, nothing important. So, the following is a copy of the letter of the orders. The great King Artaxerxes sends greetings to the rulers of provinces, 127 satrapies, from India to Ethiopia, even to those who are faithful to our interests. Many who have been frequently honored by the most abundant kindness of their benefactors have conceived the ambitious designs, and not only endeavor to hurt our subjects, but moreover, not being able to bear prosperity, they also endeavor to plot against their own benefactors. And they not only would utterly abolish gratitude from among men, but also, elated by the boastings of men who are strangers to all that is good, they supposed that they shall escape the sin-hating vengeance of the ever-seeing God. And oftentimes exhortation has made partakers of the guilt of shedding innocent blood, and has involved irremediable, hard to say that, calamities, many of those who had been appointed to offices of authority, who had been entrusted with the management of their friends' affairs, while by the false sophistry of an evil disposition they have deceived the simple candor of the ruling powers. And it is possible to see, not so much from more ancient traditionary accounts as it is immediately in your power, by examining what things have been wickedly perpetrated by the baseness of men unworthily holding power. And take heed with regard to the future, that we may maintain the government in undistributed peace for all men, adopting changes and ever judging those cases which come under our notices with truly equitable decision. For whereas Haman, a Macedonian, the son of Amydathus, in reality an alien from the blood of the Persians, and differing widely from our mild course of government, having been hospitable entertained by us, obtained so large a share of our universal kindness as to be called our father, and to continue the person next to the royal throne, reverenced of all. But overcome by the pride, he endeavored to deprive us of our dominion and our life, having by various and subtle artifices demanded for destruction both Mordecai, our deliverer and perpetual benefactor, and Esther, the blameless consort of the kingdom, with their whole nation. For by these methods he thought, having surprised us in a defenseless state, to transfer the dominion of the Persians to the Macedonians. But we find that the Jews, who have been consigned to destruction by the most abominable of men, are not malefactors, but living according to the justest laws, and being the sons of the living God, the Most High and Mighty, who maintains the kingdom, to us as well as to our forefathers in the most excellent order. You will therefore do well in refusing to obey the letter sent by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, because he that has done these things has been hanged with his whole family at the gates of Susa, Almighty God having swiftly returned to him a worthy recompense. Then, having openly published a copy of this letter in every place, to give to the Jews permission to use their own lawful customs and to strengthen them, that on the 13th of the 12th month Adar, on the self-same day, they may defend themselves against those who attack them in a time of affliction. For in the place of the destruction of the chosen race, Almighty God has granted them this gladness. Do ye therefore also, among your feasts, keep a distinct day with all festivity, that both now and hereafter it may be a day of deliverance to us, and who are well disposed towards the Persians, but to those that plotted against us a memorial of the destruction. And every city and province collectively, which shall not do accordingly, shall be consumed with vengeance by spear and fire. It shall be made not only inaccessible to men, but most hateful to wild beasts and birds forever. And let the copies be posted in conspicuous places throughout the kingdom, and let all the Jews be ready against this day to fight against their enemies. So what's crazy is that this letter is very pro-Torah and very pro the Jews. And so it basically says that anyone who doesn't keep the Feast of Purim deserves to die. That's basically what Esther is saying here. So you can see that that kind of language could sound very offensive to Gentiles. And this also, I believe, is evidence, because Esther and Mordecai wrote this, that according to them, they want the Gentiles to keep Purim as well. Anyone who is on the side of the people of Persia or Israel about this story is to celebrate this story. Then, so, let's see. And then this is from the it's the alpha text again. The alpha text is let's see, right here. So it says, the king authorized Mordecai to write whatever he wished, so Mordecai sent out letters and sealed them with the king's signet ring, saying that his people should each remain in their own land and celebrate a feast to God. And the letter which Mordecai sent contained these things. Haman sent to you letters containing thus, hasten quickly to send the disobedient nation of the Jews to me for destruction. But I, Mordecai, inform you that the one who did this has been hung at the gates of Susa, and his household has been dispatched. For this one wished to kill us on the 13th of the month that is Adar. So we see that extra letter that Mordecai wrote. It's not in the regular Septuagint version either, but it is in the Alpha manuscripts. And then finally, right here, the final verse of this chapter, we look at this. We see, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. The Septuagint says, many of the Gentiles were circumcised and became Jews for fear of the Jews. There's that extra detail. That's a religious detail. The reference to circumcised was removed because of its religious connotation, and then also because the Gentiles hated circumcision. And then also, the basic point of the scribes was, well, it says they became Jews. It's implied that they circumcised, so we don't have to say it. That's kind of their thinking of why they removed that reference. Now, we're getting close to the end, everybody. So we'll do chapter 9 and then chapter 10, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll try to be quicker here. So, chapter 9. For in the 12th month, on the 13th day of the month, which is Adar, the letters written by the king arrived. In that day the adversaries of the Jews perished, for no one resisted through fear of them. For the chiefs of the satraps and the princes and the royal scribes honored the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai lay upon them. For the order of the king was enforced that he should be celebrated in all the kingdom. It looks like verse 5 is missing here. And in the city Susa the Jews slew 500 men. Both Pharsanus and Delphon and Phasga and Pharadatha and Baria and Sarbaka and Marmassima and Ruphaeus and Arsaeus and Zabutheus, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Ammodathus the Bugian, the enemy of the Jews, and they plundered on the same day. And the number of them that perished in Susa was rendered to the king. And the king said to Esther, the Jews have slain 500 men in the city Susa, and how thinkest thou have they used them in the rest of the country? What then dost thou yet ask, that it may be for thee? And Esther said to the king, let it be granted to the Jews so to treat them tomorrow as to hand the 10 sons of Haman. And he permitted it to be so done. And he gave up to the Jews the bodies of the sons of Haman to hang. And the Jews assembled in Susa on the 14th of Adar, and slew 300 men, but plundered no property. And the rest of the Jews who were in the kingdom assembled and helped one another, and obtained rest from their enemies, for they destroyed 15,000 of them on the 13th of Adar, but took no spoil. And they rested on the 14th of the same month, and kept it as a day of rest with joy and gladness. And the Jews in the city Susa assembled also on the 14th and rested. And they kept also the 15th with joy and gladness. On this account, then, the Jews dispersed in every foreign land keep the 14th of Adar a holy day with joy, sending portions each to his neighbor. And Mordecai wrote these things in a book, and sent them to the Jews, as many as were in the kingdom of Artaxerxes, both them that were near and them that were far off, to establish these joyful days, and to keep the 14th and 15th of Adar. For on these days the Jews obtained rest from their enemies, and the month which was Adar, in which a change was made for them, from mourning to joy, and from sorrow to a good day, to spend the whole of it good days of feasting and gladness, sending portions to their friends and to the poor. And the Jews consented accordingly, as Mordecai wrote to them, how Haman, the son of Amidathus the Macedonian, fought against them, how he made a decree and cast lots to destroy them utterly, and how also he went in to the king, telling to hang Mordecai. But all the calamities he tried to bring upon the Jews came upon himself, and he was hanged and his children. Therefore these days were called Puree, because of the lots, for in their language they are called Puree, because of the words of this letter, and all they suffered on this account, and all that happened to them. And he established it, and the Jews took upon themselves, and upon their seed, and upon those that were joined to them, neither would they of any account behave differently. But these days are a memorial kept in every generation, and city, and family, and province. All these days of the Purim, or Puree, shall be kept forever, and the memorial shall not fail in any generation. And Queen Esther, the daughter of Aminadab, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote all that they had done, and the confirmation of the letter of Purim, or Puree. Verse 30 is missing here. And Mordecai and Esther the queen appointed for themselves privately, even at that time, also having formed their plan against their own health. And Esther established it by a command forever, and it was written for a memorial. Now let's look at what was it, verse 5. Let's see what that verse was. Next chapter. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto them that hated them. And then also there was verse 30. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth. Yeah. Now let's check here. Hold on. I thought I should have a note here. Oh yeah, right here. So verse 16. Take a look at this. It's interesting. Verse 16. Wait, maybe it's not verse 16. Hold on. Yeah, okay, yes it is. It says, they slew of their foes 70 and 5,000. So the Jews, according to the Hebrew version, killed 75,000 people. Even though it said, I don't know, it seems like a high number of people that they killed. The Greek version says, right here, 15,000 they killed. That seems much more believable and likely to be the original. So I think it said 15,000 originally, and for some reason it got changed into 75. Let's see the word here. Right here, it's 5 and 7. 70,000. The 10. What's 10? Osir. It's Ayin Shin Resh is for 10. So I'm not sure how they came up with 7 here. But anyways, now let's check this out. Verse 19. The Hebrew says, they made the 14th day of the month gladness and feasting, and a good day. The Septuagint says that they made it a holy day. So it's not just a day that they declared, but it's actually a holy day. That's a clear difference. Right here, it says they kept it as a holy day with joy. Then also we've got those living in large cities also celebrate the 15th of Adar as a holy day of gladness. We see, and that's in the Alpha text. Let's see. I think it is. Wait. No. Wait a minute. Hold on. Yeah, so it's not in this translation apparently, but it is in the other translation I was using. It says, but those living in the large cities also celebrated the 15th of Adar. It was a holy day of gladness, sending portions one to another. Then it says, wrote these things in a book and sent these things. So it was written in a book. That's verse 19. No, excuse me, verse 20. It just says in the Hebrew text, he wrote these things and sent letters. It says right here, Sepharim, or letters. But it says in the Greek Septuagint, in a book. So that's an interesting difference. And then also at the end of verse 21, right here we just see, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly. We say, for hymns and rejoicing in the stead of pain and grief. Yeah, and that's from the Alpha text. And once again, the name difference, Aminadab as compared to Abihail, verse 29. Daughter of Abihail versus Aminadab. And then, let's see here. To confirm the second letter, it says, verse 29. The second letter of Purim. The second letter seems to talk about this book of Esther itself. And then also verse 32, it's an interesting one, where it says in the Hebrew, and the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Hebrew text. And Esther confirmed it by a command forever, these matters of Purim. And it was written in the book for a memorial. You can see that at the end of the chapter right here, forever. That's an interesting thing. So they removed that forever. So you see there's a much greater endorsement of Purim as a holy day that we are required to keep in the Septuagint version. Now, that was that chapter, and now we go to the last final chapter. It's pretty short, so we'll go through that now. And the king levied upon the kingdom both by land and sea, and his strength and valor and the wealth and glory of his kingdom, behold, they are written in the book of the Persians and Medes for memorial. And Mordecai was viceroy to King Artaxerxes, and was a great man in the kingdom, and honored by the Jews, and passed his life beloved of all his nation. And Mordecai said, These things have been done of God. For I remember the dream which I had concerning these matters, for not one particular of them has failed. There was the little fountain which became a river, and there was light, and the sun, and much water. The river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. And the two serpents are I and Haman. And the nations are those that combine to destroy the name of the Jews. But my nation, this is Israel, they that cried to God and were delivered. For the Lord delivered his people, and the Lord rescued us out of all these calamities. And God wrought such signs and great wonders as have not been done among the nations. Therefore did he ordain two lots, one for the people of God and one for all the others. And these two lots came for an appointed season, and for a day of judgment before God and for all the nations. And God remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. And they shall observe these days in the month Adar, on the 14th and on the 15th of the month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before God throughout the generations forever among his people Israel. And then it gives a scribal note. In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said he was a priest and Levite, and Ptolemy his son brought this epistle of Purim, which they said was the same, and that Lysimachus, the son of Ptolemy, that was in Jerusalem, had interpreted it, or translated it. Interpreted is a word in ancient times. It's used to mean translate, because translation is an interpretation. So let's see. Chapter 10, like all this extra stuff, the mention of the dream is not in the Hebrew text. Here's what we have in the Hebrew text. Just a tiny little thing. 3 verses. See? And all the power, it's written in the Chronicles, it says, and then for Mordecai the Jew is next to blah, blah, blah. So here we've got this, verse 2. And all the acts of his power and his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles? Right here, we got this. The Septuagint says, and the wealth and glory of his kingdom. That's extra detail. And then once again, it also says, for a memorial. That's extra words. And then in verse 3, Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and he was a great man in the kingdom and honored among the Jews. It just says here, and great among the Jews, and accepted with the multitude of his brethren. So we see the extra stuff right here. Great man in the kingdom and honored. So there's some extra details there. So let's see. One other thing to note is the Alpha text presents a different version of the vision interpretation. He says, from God these things have come, for he remembered the dream that he saw, and it was fulfilled. And he said, the little spring is Esther, and the 2 dragons are I, myself, and Haman. The river is the nations that gathered together to destroy the Jews. The sun and light are the revelation of God that appeared to the Jews. This is the judgment. And God has done these signs and wonders which have not happened among the nations. And he made 2 lots, one for the people of God and one for the nations. And these lots approached the hours at the right time of the day of the lordship of the everlasting one among the nations. And God remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. And all the people cried out in a loud voice, and blessed are you, Lord, who remembers the covenants made with our fathers. Amen. And then, of course, the text ends with a command to keep Purim forever. It says, and they shall observe these days in the month Adar, on the 14th and on the 15th of the month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before God throughout the generations forever among his people Israel. And that command is in the Septuagint, but it's not in the Hebrew text. So you can read the Hebrew text without saying, okay, it's not commanded for everybody to do. It's not required. It doesn't say forever. So remember, because they removed the detail of forever from chapter 9. It doesn't say it in chapter 10 either. But we got it right here in the Septuagint version. It says forever they must observe this in Israel. And same in chapter 9, it said forever. So that's the version of the Book of Esther. I will read one final thing from this. 2 things here. First, I mentioned why did Esther, what's wrong with the Book of Esther? Why did some Jews and Christians reject the Book of Esther and they didn't consider it scripture? And here's why. if the Hebrew version of Esther is the original, here's the problems it has. Or even if it's not the original, it has these problems. There's not a single reference to God in the Hebrew Book of Esther. Not a single reference to the religion of the Jews or to any religion whatsoever. Not a single moral exhortation. It is only solely a secular historical account of the Jews, nothing more. The regular Book of Esther actively seeks to suppress, censor, and omit the religious elements of the historical narrative of Esther that we know happened. The regular Book of Esther implies that Esther married a Gentile, which is a capital crime in the law of Moses, unless that Gentile converted to Judaism. And then finally, the Hebrew version of Esther, by its silence, implies Esther did not keep the law of Moses but was a secular Jew and did not obey the commandments of the law of Moses when she was queen. All of this makes the Book of Esther look like a horrible book, and that shouldn't be scripture. But none of these issues are in the Septuagint version. And finally, let's see. I'm going to read these two quotes right here. In Josephus' writings, Josephus actually follows the Septuagint and endorses the fuller version of Esther. And the translator of Josephus, named William Whiston, he says in his footnote, "As to this whole book of Esther in the present Hebrew copy, it is so very imperfect, in a case where the providence of God was so very remarkable, and the Septuagint and Josephus have so much of religion that it has not so much as the name of God once in it. And it is hard to say who made that epitome or which the Masoretes have given us for the genuine book itself. No religious Jews could well be the authors of it, whose education obliged them to have a constant regard to God, and whatsoever related to his worship. Nor do we know that there was ever so imperfect a copy of it in the world till after the days of Bar Kokhba in the 2nd century." This was written by a Christian, by the way. So this Christian guy says no religious Jews could well be the authors of it because the Jews, they were obliged to have a constant regard to God and whatsoever related to his worship. So I agree with this. The Book of Esther does not reflect a writing of real Jews. It reflects some type of suppression that was happened. Here's a quote from the NIV, a study edition, study Bible of the NIV. They gave some footnote here. Hold on. So it says, "Why isn't God mentioned at all?" Yeah, so there's like a little note right here, a study note. It says, "Is the Book of Esther godless? Why isn't God mentioned at all in this book? This question has been a source of controversy for centuries. Some have even questioned the book's place in the Bible because of it. However, at several points in the narrative, the author alludes to God's hands in the events. For example, Mordecai's contention that deliverance would come from another place is probably the author's way of saying Yahweh would intervene for his people. Esther's request that they all fast was no doubt a reference to prayer to Yahweh on her behalf. The Jews' refusal to plunder their enemies indicated that they fought for Yahweh, not themselves. In addition, the writer shows God's involvement through an incredible string of coincidences." Then later on in the quote, "The reader is left saying, nobody could be so lucky. Something else must have been going on. The story points to God as the one behind the scenes orchestrating the events." Later in the quote, "Still, the question remains, did the writer deliberately edit God out of the story? We can only speculate. Perhaps the author was employing the literary device of understatement to emphasize that nothing short of God's direct intervention in these circumstances could explain the way things worked out. Or, since the book was written in Persia, the author may have been aware of certain laws against non-Persian religions or may not have wanted to risk having the book destroyed by the government." And I emphasize that by underline. So basically, my theory is supported by these scholars that did the NIV thing, and I believe that during the time of the Roman, remember the Roman people, they killed the Christians, and they also killed Jews sometimes too. And the reason they did was because they feared them and believed that they would try to overthrow the government. And the Book of Esther is so full of anti-government stuff of the Gentiles. It's so full of pro-Judaism in the Septuagint version, pro-Torah. So like highly elevating the Jews and putting down Gentiles. It really sounds like, okay, this is dangerous. We don't want these Jews keeping the Feast of Purim because this is actively encouraging rebellion against the government of Rome. So they basically, the Jews, knowing that this was going to happen, they decided to make a censored version where they could read the Book of Esther publicly, and no one would look at it and say, wait a minute, these Jews are going to try to rebel against us. Because, as I said, the original version mentions how Esther says, please allow us to have bloodshed against our enemies. That's basically an endorsement of the Jews being able to have revenge on their enemies and doing bloodshed. That would the Romans would say, okay, the Jews are going to try to kill us with bloodshed because this book tells them it's okay. So you see, there's a strong and good, obvious motivation why they would censor this book, because they didn't want to be persecuted by the Romans. They wanted to be able to keep Purim in peace without the government banning it. And that's a very logical explanation. I think that's the only way to explain the radical differences in these manuscripts. I see no way possible that Jews, righteous, faithful Jews who were trying to follow the Torah, added all this stuff into the Book of Esther, added all these things which they knew was not part of the Book of Esther, and then pretending that it was. It doesn't make sense. No righteous Jew would have done that. It does make sense for scribes, Jews, to remove stuff because they were afraid of what other people would think, or to remove details that they thought were unnecessary. So anyways, that's basically what I wanted to share with you guys today. Let's see. I thought I was sharing my screen with you guys. Did you guys see the screen share? Hopefully you guys were seeing the screen share. If not, then I think it's on the recording. I was sharing my screen the whole time. Okay. Good. Now, any final questions before we end this? And I want to show that video one more time, but some of you guys already saw that video, but it was a little choppy. So I'm going to put that video one last time. It's the short little thing. It's just kind of neat to see it played out. So let me pull up that video right now. So do you guys have any final questions about what we read, or any thoughts about what we read? This amazing stuff. Did you guys enjoy the study of this version of Esther? Did you find the information very compelling or eye-opening? Let's see, opening it right now. Glad you guys enjoyed it. I hope other people will listen to this on the recording and that they will really enjoy it. So now, I'm gonna do this video. It's 2 minutes long, and then we will end it. Right, and Joshua said, sad we have to look so hard for the truth, but only truth seekers will. Yeah, basically, if you guys are convinced that this is true, that what I said is true, and that this version is the original Book of Esther, guess what? This didn't happen just with the Book of Esther. I have compelling evidence that this also happened with many books of the Old Testament. The New Testament was actually surprisingly well preserved, in relatively speaking. The books that were horribly altered are Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, especially. That's probably the worst book of all, Deuteronomy, that's been altered. And then 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther was altered. Psalms, Proverbs, those were the big ones that were altered. All right, so sharing my screen one more time. And here's the video. Let's put this on. I want to put this on 720. All right, let's see here. here's the one last time. Yeah, so that's the video again. And so thank you guys for studying with me and listening it all out. It was a little bit long, but I appreciate you staying for the whole thing. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we will be studying again next week, continuing where we left off from the Book of Enoch. Shalom, and may God bless you guys, and glad to be friends and studying with you guys.